Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for today, which is October 29th, 2021. I'm sure most of you have been following the updates of the last week on the COP26 conference, which, if we're lucky, will turn into FLOP 26. Not if we're lucky, but if we organize to make sure it happens, we can defeat the efforts at massive depopulation that are coming from the Davos billionaires and the globalist elite who are running this conference on the fraud of global warming. That's going to begin this weekend. We'll have updates on this next week, and presumably the word has gotten out that with some governments not participating, other governments will be there but will be at odds with the goals. This will not succeed. Now, I should tell you that there are other stories that I would like to follow that just, there's so much going on, but there was a very interesting one I'll just call your attention to. Defense One website had a story about the need to change the outdated assumption of the U.S. military that the U.S. needs to prepare for war with Russia or China, but not both. This is a report on the recently concluded Joint Sea maneuvers between Russia and China. And it says that in addition to the hypersonic missile the Chinese tested, it shows that there are operational capabilities which we're not prepared for. And this, of course, is the case of the utopians who just lost the war in Afghanistan, who are still trying to apply the same unipolar ideas of U.S. military power to a world which is no longer open to that. So the necessity to change is clear, dumping the assumptions of global warming, dumping the idea that the U.S. is a unipolar power that can use its military to impose its so-called rules-based order. And we'll be covering that extensively as we get into next week. Just one word on that, on the scheduling. I will not have an update on Monday. I'm going to be on assignment over the weekend through Monday, but I will be back on Tuesday. So let's get to the questions. A lot of interesting questions. I'm going to put two together. One is from a supporter who's a friend of mine, the motorcycle cowboy, who asks, "Don't you feel like a prophet shouting in the desert?" And I think maybe that's the way he feels. And a second question related to that, given LaRouche's record, which has been so precise in his forecasts and so accurate, why are people still afraid of identifying with him? Well, the fact is that people all over the world are familiar with LaRouche, that he has provided an understanding for a unifying conception of what the problem is. It's an assault on the very notion of progress, and the basis for progress being the recognition of that progress comes from the expansion of the creative powers of human beings, not one or two geniuses here and there, but of the whole society, which is realized through technological and scientific advance, which is only possible when you have a growing number of people educated and brought in as citizens to make sure that the system functions. And what LaRouche has always identified is that that's the target of the enemy, to destroy that conception of man, to convince us that we're weak, that we're isolated, that we're ineffective, that the government is so powerful, that the bad guys are so powerful, and that you have no choice but to submit if you wish to make it. And making it, by the way, means what? Making money, having influence, being popular. That's what the social media culture is about. Now, on the question of do I feel like a prophet shouting into the wind? No. I know there are a lot of you out there who are paying attention. I wish there were more. I wish you were more active in recruiting your friends and others to join us. But that's where we come up with the second question. The slandering of LaRouche was done to prevent people from listening, to keep you from being bold enough to go out and challenge them, to challenge their assumptions. And I covered this in a recent article that's posted on my blog page on October 19th, which is titled "Behind the Attempted Murder of Lyndon LaRouche on October 6, 1986, was his exposure of Shaktian fascism. Schacht is an important figure, not because he was so brilliant or anything, but he was the sort of the pivot point around which the launching by international corporate cartels of a global fascist movement took his idea of how to carry out austerity, which led directly to the concentration camps and the mass genocide in World War II. It became, after World War II, somewhat difficult for people to advocate that policy. So they developed code words for it, like environmentalism, like overpopulation. But LaRouche cut right to the core of this. The people promoting these ideas aren't interested in preserving security and stability and a prosperous economy. They're interested in protecting their power, their satanic grip over power, and to impose on people a sense of desperate hopelessness so they can continue to govern. And that's why, in the case of LaRouche, they targeted him and challenged him. I mean, they didn't challenge him, they challenged the population. Don't listen to this guy, he's bad. As Lynn once said, he's bad, but we can't tell you why, was basically what they said. Because if they actually took up the ideas of LaRouche, it would be clear that he was not just a modern day prophet, but a thinker who brought out in others the best qualities of creative capability. And that's what we have to do. We have to demonstrate our empathy or our love of humanity, in some ways by being tough on them, by going after their delusions, going after their foolishness, but at the same time showing them that we respect the potential of human beings to rise to the occasion. This has to happen today as we're in an existential crisis for civilization. So I would encourage more of you to become prophets, not shouting into the wind, but dialoguing with your friends, neighbors, co-workers, fellow churchgoers, and so on. Now, next question. What's happening with the attempt to set up a coalition government in Germany, and what's going on with the European Union? Well, in Germany, you have parties that are dysfunctional, and they're in a race to the bottom. Each time, the leading parties are getting a lower and lower percentage of the vote. This time, the Social Democrats barely hit 25%. The Christian Democrats had their lowest total in generations. The Greens didn't make that much gain, a little bit, but only because the others lost. The Free Democrats, the neoliberals, they're all trying to figure out how to form a coalition which goes against the founding principles of their parties. For example, the Social Democrats come from a tradition of defending the interests of working people and the poor and the middle class, to fight for progress. And yet they're now totally embracing the green ideology, which is anti-progress. The Greens, who were started as a so-called environmental movement and as a peace movement, are now the leading war hawk party in Germany, and with no sense of shame in making that transition. And then you have the Free Democrats, the liberals, who are opposed in the past to green ideology. They're opposed to government regulations, which with green ideology, the government would be forced to impose them. They're opposed to more taxes, but the Social Democrats want to increase taxes. So how do you form coalitions without giving up your principles? And if you do that, how do you defend that to your voters? So we're in a mess here in Germany. Now, the mess has been increased by the recognition in neighboring countries such as Poland and Hungary that the whole policy of the European Union is to take away the sovereignty of nations. So the people of the various nations have no say over their future. And there's a huge fight now where Poland is insisting that its Supreme Court, its High Court, must have the ultimate say on legal questions, not the European Union courts. And similar situation in Hungary on cultural issues, on economic issues, and so on. But there are tensions with many other countries. There are tensions developing now between France and Germany, in particular over the French return to the idea of nuclear power while Germany is in an exit from nuclear power. But there's also a below the surface debate over whether there should be better relations with Russia and China or join the US UK confrontation with Russia and China. So Europe is a mess, and there's no easy way out of it except to organize people to recognize that what passed for business as usual in the past doesn't work anymore. And you need to address these crises with new, fresh approach. And that new, fresh approach is the approach of Lyndon LaRouche. Now, this comes to the final question I'm going to take today. How do we reach those clinging to the hope that their 401ks will get them through the crisis? The delusions that things will be okay, even among people who have no trust in government, in media, and at the same time no willingness to get out and fight for a change in policy. Well, this is what we've been talking about. You have to be partisans of truth, speaking the truth to power. The narratives that are presented to people through the media and through the political parties are false. In many cases, they're malicious inventions, such as the idea of Russia and China as eternal enemies against the West. In other cases, they're self-delusions that somehow you can strike it rich through stock manipulations, through precious metals, that there's somehow a safe place when the whole system is undergoing a systemic collapse. The only way to address people is to be honest and truthful and let them know you're challenging them, not out of an attempt to be king of the hill, but to bring them into a mobilization to change things. I don't think most people are happy with the situation. There's a small number of very wealthy people, but they're not so happy because in their view, they could never be wealthy enough. They could never have enough power. You look at people like Zuckerberg, like Bill Gates. You look at these people who are doing everything they can to accrue more money and more power. And they may have some, quote, ideal, unquote, utopian solutions. But what do they do when they're confronted with something like mass starvation in Afghanistan or Yemen or Syria? What do you do when you're confronted with a government which is pushing for austerity, including policies that increase the prices of everything, at a point at which people have jobs that don't give them enough money to cover necessities? So bring out these ironies. The so-called Biden solution on infrastructure. There's no infrastructure to it. There's no there, as they say. You have to take these situations and show the paradoxes in the way they're thinking. For example, someone who spouts off about Chinese genocide without a bit of information about what's actually happening in Xinjiang province. Have they investigated what the Muslim community, the Uyghur community in Xinjiang province is saying? Well, the anti-China lobby is telling you they're being genocided, they're being rounded up and put in concentration camps. The actual population of Uyghurs has doubled in the last decade. Their level of income has doubled. The number of mosques that are open there have increased. People who say there's no religious freedom in China go to Xinjiang province. The argument is being used by people who want to destroy the Chinese economic miracle because they're destroying the U.S. economic miracle and they don't want to be challenged by a rising China. Use these ironies. Or someone who talks about the rules-based order, such as Tony Blinken. Well, what rule is it that says we should starve the children of Afghanistan in order to protect the women and children of Afghanistan? How is that a rules-based order? How is that humanitarian? So I think the ironies that we present that are available through our website, through the videos and the presentations we do, use those ironies. Don't expect an immediate conversion, but a lot of the people who are clinging more tightly to their beliefs are doing so because they're fearful. And if you just hit them over the head, that doesn't remove their fear. But if you give them a sense that they can figure out who's oppressing them, Who's really responsible for this crisis? The role of the British, the role of Wall Street and the City of London, the role of the social media in focusing people more on being popular in smaller and smaller groups than thinking about what is a national mission we should be undertaking. Use those ironies to get people to think. So I'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks for joining me this week. Spread these videos around. Get people to go on our website and download the various reports that we're producing. And be sure to sign up for our November 13, November 14, two-day Schiller Institute conference coming up. You can go to the schillerinstitute.com website and find the registration form. See you later.